Yo, what's up everyone? Today I'm going to be showing you how to make this abstract scene / object in Blender. If you're new to Blender, this shouldn't be too complicated for you to follow along, and I'll try and explain everything I'm doing. So without any further ado, let's jump straight into it. So I've opened up Blender, and the first thing we want to do is head over to Preferences. Once we're in the Preferences, we want to go to Get Extensions, and then let's search for Extra Mesh Objects. And then you can see we have this Extra Mesh Objects extension, and we can just click Install. Then we can close out of that. Now if we press Shift A and go to the Mesh section here, we have a bunch of Extra Mesh Objects. So first of all, let's totally obliterate the cube. Now that's done, let's press Shift A and add a torus object and a torus knot. Now I'm going to open the drop down here, and we can just up the resolution. Yeah, something like 200 should be good. Then we can right click and shade smooth. Then to get the real effect, we want to add a modifier, and let's add a simple deform. Set it to the Z axis, and let's make the angle like 170. Now we have this crazy sort of spiral object, and we can just set up a simple scene here. Delete the light, select the camera, press Alt R and Alt G. That resets the location and rotation. Then I'll press RX 90. That's just typing 90 on the keyboard. Then we can move it back on the Y and view the camera. And bring it back a bit more. Bring it up as well. And let's add a floor plane, scale that up. Move the camera up a bit as well. I want to make this plane pretty big, something like that. And I'll just position this, something like that looks fine for the moment. Then we can also add a few UV spheres, shade that smooth, scale it down, and just duplicate that around a bit. Put another one back here. And something like this should be good for the moment. So yeah, that's fine. Now we need to head over to the shading tab, and I'll just save this now before I forget. I've lost way too many files from not saving, so better do that now. Now we're going to be using the same material I made in a previous tutorial. It was basically just a iridescent glass material, but I'll show you how to make that real quick, and I'll just collapse these windows here. So we want to make a new material. I'll call this main. Delete the principled BSDF, add a glass BSDF. We want to make this one fully red. Duplicate it, and then duplicate it again. We want to make this one fully green, and this one fully blue. So now we have the three primary colors. We can mix these together. So let's add a add shader, plug those in like that, duplicate that, and plug it in like so. And now we have all those mixed together. We can actually change the render engine to cycles and turn it to GPU. Then we can head over to render view and disable scene lights and scene world. I kind of want it to be a bit more refracted so you can see the red, green, and blue colors. So we can just change the IOR on this one to 1.45 and on this one to 1.4. And now we have a refracted effect. Then I'll just add a value node and plug that into the roughness of all three of these. Then we can turn this to like 1 or something to get fully rough, or like 0.1, something like that, and it changes them all at the same time. So to get the effect I want, where we kind of have stripes and we can only see the glass in some areas, we want to add a mix shader. So we want to add a principled BSDF and plug that into the socket of the mix shader. Now we're mixing these two together, and I'll set this to a fairly dark value. Now we want to make a mask so the glass only shows in some areas and the black material only shows in some areas as well. So let's add a noise texture, and we can view this, plug it into the surface. Let's set the scale and the noise to something like 10. We can lower the detail as well, make that 0. Then let's add a mapping and a texture coordinate. What? And a texture coordinate. Darn it. And a texture coordinate, finally. And let's plug the generated into the mapping and the mapping into the noise. So now to get the stretched effect, where we kind of have stripes, we can set the scales Y to like 20, and then that stretches out and we have that sort of stripy effect. And then we can add a color ramp in between here and just adjust that a bit and get a more defined result. Okay, that should be fine. Now to mix this together, we can plug the color ramp into the factor of the mix shader and then plug the mix shader into the output. And then now we have that effect. We can also adjust the color ramp a bit to get a better result. Something like this is probably fine. Now we can add this same main material to our spheres. And let me just rearrange these nodes a little bit just to make it a little bit easier to change this in the future. I'll just enable snapping. And something like that should be good for the moment. Now we want to add a floor material. So I'll make a new material and just call this floor. Actually, let's call it ground. And for this, I want to use a texture from Ambient CG. So let's open up a browser. I'm just using Arc, and then we can just search for ambientcg.com. And then I'll just search for tile. And there is a bunch of nice options here, but the one I like for this project is this one right here. So we can click on that, and then I'll download the 4K JPEG version. Okay, so that's downloaded now, and we have all these files. And then let's drop in the color and the roughness. And I'll plug the color into the base color of the principal BSDF, and we can plug the roughness into the roughness. Now I want the tiles to be a bit darker, so I'll add a hue, saturation, and value node in between there, and I'll set the value to 0.1. Then let's also add a mapping and texture coordinate node, and plug that into both of them. And we'll use the UV, tap into edit mode, press U, and cube project that. Now let's go back to camera view. And this can be a little bit smaller, so maybe the value of 2 would be nice. Now let's add some lighting. So I'm going to head back to our layout, go to rendered view, and we want to make the world fully black. So I'll do that. And then let's add a light, area light. Holy moly, voice crack. Now we can position this above and scale it up a bit. Let's set the value to something like 1000, maybe even higher. Let's try 2000. And then let's duplicate this and bring it down, rotate it like that. And then you can see we have this really nice light up effect, and you can see in here that it's really like shining through those glassy bits, but it's also making a big light leak on the ground. That's totally fine if you like that, but that's not really what I'm going for. So what I'll do is use light linking. So let's select the light, go over to object properties, down to shading, and then light linking. Let's make a new light linking group, and then we can just drag in our torus knot, our spheres, and that should be good. Maybe if we scale it up a bit more as well and move it like there, we have some really nice rim lighting. Now I'm going to add another cube and scale this up pretty big. Turn on the overlays again till it's basically covering our whole scene. And then I'll scale it on the Z-axis and move it up. And let's head over to wireframe view. Tab into edit mode, select the back face, and then move it out pretty far. And scale it up on the X till it's outside of the camera. So something like that. Then let's head back to rendered view. And I'll just bring up the timeline here and change this to the shader editor. Make a new material, call this fog. Delete the principled BSDF. And add a principled volume node. Plug that into the volume. And let's make the density 0.1. That's way too much. Let's try 0.01. Still a bit much. Let's try 0.005. Okay, that looks pretty nice. Now we need to change a few render settings. So let's go to render properties, down to color management, and change the look to high contrast. And then I'll change the max samples to like 312. You could go higher if you want, but that should be enough for this. Let's just render this. Okay, so that's finished rendering. Now I'll close that, head over to compositing, click use nodes, and I'll add a glare node and change this to bloom. And that's not doing much, so let's change the strength to like, I don't know, 5. We could also try fog glow. I think I'll go fog glow, and 5 looks pretty good. Now I'll also add a lens distortion node drop that in and change the dispersion to like 0.01, maybe 0.05, and then we can also enable fit, and that should be fine. Then you can just select the viewer node, go to the end panel, you can press N to open that, and then go to node and save this image. Okay, so that's basically it. I hope you learned something from this tutorial and found it helpful. If you did, make sure to drop a like and maybe subscribe. And with that said, I'll see you in the next one.